right, welcome back, guys, to another episode of Gym Goss. You're here with myself, Jackson, and Sam.
What's up?
And in today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the problems we see with our clients and the general fitness community presently, which is people not pushing themselves hard enough. So, to kick off this discussion, Jackson's been quite vocal about it online recently. Jackson, tell us where this notion or thought came from and why you see this to be a pretty big issue in the current fitness landscape.
Yeah, okay. So when I guess all of us were getting into the gym and the access to evidence-based information surrounding fitness was extremely limited, and we had forums to go off and we had a few magazines to go off and not too much else apart from hearsay. We basically got into lifting weights with the assumption that to get big and to get strong, you got to work really fucking hard, and training is probably supposed to hurt a lot. And if it's not, then you're probably not doing it right. That was sort of the overall assumption that we had, and we didn't really have access to much more alternative perspectives. Now, thankfully, as we have progressed into the advanced echelon of lifters, more information has come to light. We got introduced to evidence-based fitness, which didn't really exist when we were starting out. And that introduced the concept that potentially training too hard could be debilitating towards gains, i.e. training to failure causes an exponential increase in fatigue that is not linear to gains, i.e. if the fatigue is too much for us to recover from, it could be detrimental to subsequent working sets that could impair our ability to complete subsequent volume and overload within a session. Now, another way that we could frame this was the introduction to RP and RAR. So for those who don't know, perceived exertion or repetitions in reserve, a way to quantify your proximity to failure. Now, the research came out and suggested that if RAR is too small, i.e. to failure, again, that it could be debilitating to gains, and we want to be keeping, for the most part of our training, a few reps in the tank to be progressing optimally. Now, there is a couple of issues with this. Now, a very significant issue is that most people are just fucking terrible at gauging their RAR. There was a great study published not too long ago, which had some experienced lifters come in and were tasked with performing a 10 rep max on the bench press. So they were asked, put on what you think you can do for 10 reps. And then basically the researchers just screened the fuck out of them to see actually what their true potential with their 10 rep max supposedly on the bar would be. Not one participant got 10 reps. They all got more than 10. And some people got up to as high as fucking 25 reps with their supposed 10 rep max, which basically tells us that people are pretty shit at being able to gauge what their true capacity is. So that's one potential issue with this, is that when you might tell someone to go to leave 2 reps in the tank, potentially there could be 8 reps in the tank, and potentially that's a highly suboptimal set. A second issue is this overall message that training too hard is detrimental. Now, there's not really any sport in the world where you can train submaximally all the time and expect to optimize the outcome. There's none. Really, bodybuilding or strength training is one that somehow everyone's saying that submaximal is better. So for us, it's not a major issue, but for people entering into the fitness industry now, they're coming in with the message or the assumption that, oh, we don't want to push it too hard because then we might be sort of detracting from our progress. Now, for the noob lifters who are just entering, who haven't had experience yet with doing a balls to the wall set, a set of hack squats that almost makes you want to cry at the end. They're coming in with already putting their training wheels on, so to speak, and we better be careful. We better not push it. So in combination, the mindset of don't push too hard, in combination with people are really fucking shit at gauging their perception of effort or their proximity to failure. Those things in combination is resulting in a fuckload of people leaving a shitload on the table in terms of their potential to progress throughout a training cycle.
It's a recipe for mediocrity, isn't it? And I think we've spoken in the past about this on a couple of episodes prior, Jackson, and we've even had discussions about, I have a little bit of a model where I like to teach people how to slowly learn where failure lies over time. But I totally agree that people are horrible at anchoring their RIR and actually knowing where failure lies. Martin at JPS is currently conducting a study, and he has had only one participant, which was me, get all 4 ratings of their RIR accurate across the 4 different tests.
Not to blow smoke.
I'll blow smoke. Fucking, I earned that shit, man. How hard it was to, actually concentrate. But
I know you were paying Martin on the side for that.
Yeah, I was flipping him a few pineapples under the table.
I think when you talk about Martin, the better example is Martin initially had designed the study to look at the leg press as well. And he had taken a few participants through leg pressing. Now, the way the study worked is basically you had to go to failure so you could work out your 1 rep max. So you had to work up to 1 rep max, and then he could work out a working load based at 75% for you. And on the leg press, he actually found that so many people were training so far underneath what they could actually do that the increase in volume was too much, and the potential risks involved, the amount of soreness that people were generating, was going to limit his ability to actually use the data well enough. So it's that's one example. The bench press was obviously a lot safer. People fucking fail on the bench press all the time. I think failure, sometimes people don't push appropriately. The discomfort gets in the way, on a leg press or a hack squat. It's you could probably do way more reps on a hack squat, but it gets uncomfortable, and it's it takes a lot of grit and a bit of determination. Sometimes you do need people yelling at you just to keep going, to have that mental fortitude to actually keep pushing. And that was just something Martin found. It was one of my clients, who I would say is an experienced lifter. She's done powerlifting. She's about to do a bodybuilding prep. She's been training for me for 6 years. She was doing leg pressing, 140 kilos, and her 1 rep max was well over 200. So the working weight was, 20% higher than what she'd normally be training with for a 75% working set. And it's just absurd. People are soft.
I think people might jump in who are listening to this and oh, well, those lifters in these studies, they're not experienced enough. But I'll give you
Marto's study has so many, they're all JPS clients, and they're all fucking experienced, and they had to have 3 years of training. It's absurd.
It goes right up to the top. We'll give you one note, which me and Jacob talked about before, and don't you fucking roll me under the bus with this, Jacob. But one client of mine, professional in competition, you can tell I'm being so fucking careful with the words I use here, but had previous experience with a number of different coaches doing most of person's training in the around RIR2, and I got handed over the reins with training. This person, first session, I got them to show me what a set of their normal RDLs would look like for a set with 2 reps left in the tank. They went and got the 25 kilo dumbbells, performed their usual set that they would normally perform on their previous program, and then ended it. And I said, and in my head, I was like, fucking hell, this is a professional who does really well in their category. And I thought, fucking hell, there's a shitload left here in terms of what their potential would be. And I pushed it, and 2 weeks later, doing the same amount of reps, but now with the 45 kilo dumbbells, clean.
Just a
25,
small increase.
45s. It's just, and all it required was just a little
Someone-
like, actually, no, you've
Yeah.
probably fucking got a lot more. And if you try to extrapolate that over a training year, what sort of difference in gains
Over a
are we
training
potentially
career.
talking about? Yeah, over a training career, like
Yeah.
doing the 25s versus the 45s for a fucking year, like that could be the quantum differences in terms of
Yeah.
your progress. And what's scary is people in their minds are rationalizing that they did a really fucking solid session, that they
Yeah.
did their RR2, but it's because they don't actually know where the limit is. So the gap in their mind from what they're performing and their limit is actually a fuckload bigger than they realize.
Yeah. Two things. So one, like just to emphasize that the point that people do need to be reminded just how hard they can train. Like one of my probably more experienced clients, Mary, like Jacob, you know who she is. She's a 56, 60 kilo female, dumbbell presses 30s. Like she's genuinely strong. Squats over 100, RDLs like 130. And I was like, we had a call the other day, literally like last week. And I was like, how come you're stopping your sets at like the top of the rep range? Like you said you had 2 reps in reserve last week, but you did 12, 12, 12. And then the next week, the rep range was a little bit higher, but you stopped at the top end of the rep range and you still had 2 reps in reserve. So I'm like, clearly last week you had more than 2 reps in reserve if you added 2 reps and still have 2 reps in reserve, right? And this was like happening at multiple different exercises. And now, sure, there are some exercises where she is pushing beyond the point where we would accept technique breakdown and she's getting close to a failure. And all of a sudden, the next week of training, she goes in and it's like, now she's doing more reps. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if you go, you know, you exceed the rep range. It's just a range. It's just indicative. Like, you know, you are deep in a training block. You're like week 6. You should be able to push and stop it when you feel like it's actually genuinely hard, not stop it because you hit a number. I forgot what the second one was.
I'll give you like an analogy of that. It's like people say, oh, well, it's progression. She did more than she did last week.
Yeah, but it's not enough.
And that's correct. But like, if you want to get really fucking great at sprinting, you want to be as fast as you fucking can, going from a walk to a jog ain't gonna do fucking shit. Like if you're just making minimal progressions in sub maximal performance, you cannot expect that is going to translate to an optimal progression model. It's just not.
So you're right there, Jackson, because basically what's happening in Samuel's example with his client and the one where you're going from a walk to a jog is that, yes, there is progression. And this is something that I've spoken about a lot. People conflate the two terms, progression and overload. They are not the same thing. So people always look at these things as the same thing because they're in the same word, progressive overload, but they do not mean the same thing because you can progress your training, as in the case where you add 2 reps or you add load, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's overloading, because overload means that there's a threshold for something that is going to stimulate adaptations that lead to an increase in performance, because that's what overload is. There's a threshold, the stimulus is above that, and that leads to an adaptation that increases your performance or your fitness, right? It increases your fitness, and fitness minus fatigue equals your ability to perform in a given session. So we obviously have fitness fatigue dynamics to consider when we're talking about this. But overall, progression is just doing more. You could do more every week for 10 weeks, but it doesn't mean it's overloading. It might take you 12 weeks to get to the point where it's actually overloading. Reaching failure is a really good way to foolproof your training to make sure that it is overloading. Because if you're getting to failure, that's a maximal effort. Maximal efforts are overloading 9 times out of 10. You know what I mean? Like there is no way that, you know, a maximal effort isn't going to be stimulating in some sense. Now, obviously there's a dose component. So you can do, you know, 1 set of failure. That's obviously not going to be enough in and of itself, because you need a certain number of reps or sets to get the dosing of the stimulus right for it to be overloading in its totality. But that intensity stimulus is going to come from how close to failure you are in most cases, or how heavy. So those 3 things are really important: how heavy you train, how much work you do, and then the third one being what we're discussing today, how close to failure. Because you could lift heavy enough, you could do enough sets, but you could still be leaving gains on the table if you're not taking it close enough to failure. But just adding more weight or adding more reps and progressing your training doesn't mean that it's overloading. You need to make sure that you know where failure lies, so that when you do leave your reps in reserve, where they've got RAR2 programmed, you're confident that it's actually 2 reps in reserve. And I'll just say that I'm doing my study currently, and we're using velocity tracking device to measure the speed drop off, basically the decrease in speed over the course of the set as we get closer to failure. And he uses some averages to work out basically what a 3 RIR looks like. And for me, it's about a 0.24 concentric on the bench press. Now, let me tell you that every time I've hit around 0.2, that's a slow rep for 3 reps in reserve. That's like slow off the chest, and that is hard. That doesn't feel easy. Like, if I wasn't really geared in and like dialed my focus into accurately rating my RIR, and I was just going through the motions, having a chat between sets with people, whatever it is, there's no way I'd get to that, I guess, slower concentric speed and rate that a 3 RIR. I would have rated that like a 1 rep in reserve, and I would have stopped that set way short if I wasn't really focusing. And I think that's the issue for a lot of people, is they just don't know what a 3 RIR or 2 RIR actually looks like, because they haven't ever really pushed themselves deliberately to those RIRs, and they don't have that velocity measure to compare it against. I think that's a really useful thing for people to do if they have access to that stuff.
Just before you go, Sam, I think some of that shit you just said then, Jacob, needs to be clipped out, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions in training right now is confusing progression with overload, like you said. And like, I think people, when they approach training, they have this mental box that they need to tick. And because you hear people in that industry always saying like, progressive overload, do more than what you did last week or the week before. And yes, that's correct to some degree. But if the gap between what you're doing and your potential to what you could be able to do is so large, progressing that is really not going to fucking do too much. It's like that walk to the walk to jog analogy. If it's not in a close enough proximity to maximal effort, then I'm just not convinced that it's going to be translating to reasonable gains.
I think that's what he was saying, though.
No, that's what. No,
I'm agreeing with him. I'm agreeing with him.
Yeah.
I'm saying it needs to be clipped out.
And like sent to people. It's just like all the people that don't train hard enough will just send it straight to him.
I mean what he was saying is fucking right.
Yeah, I've made plenty of graphics, man. If you just check out my Instagram page, there's a few graphics there.
Fuck the graphics. Let's get our heads on it.
All right, we'll get our heads on it. Notes to Timmy to get our heads on it. So also something that needs to be understood in terms of the definitions there that Jackson's using. Submaximal is not the same as maximal, but near maximal. So near maximal and maximal, that's like your 3 RIR, your 2 RIR, your 1 RIR. That's near maximal. Then a failure is like maximal. That's maximal effort. Submaximal would be anything like, say, below a 5 RIR. So near maximal will stimulate some adaptations, right? But maximal is obviously like going to give you the most adaptations, given per given unit of time, essentially, right? And if you have less maximal adaptations, or the further you go from maximal to near maximal, so you're having more reps in the tank, you have to compensate for that decrease in mechanical tension, right? Or growth stimulus per set by doing more sets. So that's a very viable way to continue to grow. But at the same time, you're just doing more work for the sake of it when you could be just pushing a little bit harder. And what happens is when you have that mentality of doing more sets to compensate for training closer to failure, your RIR ratings just drop off completely, because you're looking for the easy way out, in my opinion. I don't know what you think about Jackson. I see people who take that approach of, I'll leave a few reps in reserve because I want to do higher volumes. But they just do that to, I guess, compensate for their lack of willingness to really go there on the first few sets. And that just waters down the accuracy of their RIR the more sets they do, basically.
I 100% agree. I think I'll let you go in a second, Sam. I think one of the worst approaches is gains haven't been great, so they just throw on a bunch more submaximal sets, and it's like, well, if it just becomes purely like a volume game. But I think if the sets that you're completing that are contributing to that volume are just of true submax, then it's just throwing extra jump on the fucking scrap heap that's not really fucking contributing to anything. And I think so many people would benefit from scaling back their overall set volume and actually pushing the sets that they are doing closer to a maximal effort.
Yeah. So I think one of the main reasons we often see people not pushing, or like maybe it's a reluctance, or maybe I don't know what it is like like we've already said, getting to those, deep in a set where it's really hard, the reps are slow, you have to grind it out, you're bracing, you're straining. It's like, that's uncomfortable. And not a lot of people enjoy that feeling. They're like, oh yeah, I went to the gym and I trained. But I think, self-belief is a big one. Like, people often don't believe that they can do these things. Like, oh, I never, and like another good story, like good example, I had a client who, her goal at the start of the year was to squat 70 kilos. She squatted 105 today. And it's like, you have to believe that you can be able to do that. Otherwise, why would you even bother trying? If you think it's never going to happen, you're never going to load the bar up. You're never going to push yourself, take yourself out of your comfort zone, and actually being willing to experience that uncomfortable position being at the bottom of a squat.
Well, right? You hear about some of the best lifts ever happening when people fucking accidentally put the wrong weight on the bar.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've heard of that.
Actually, Steffi Cohen, like, she has a great message. Like, I think it was on one of Jeff Nippard's podcasts with her. It's like, every time she trains, she goes in there to be the best. And this was something I said to one of my young clients he's like 18 now. He's been training with me online. He trains in a garage by himself at home, like Country Vic. And I said, there's a difference between training and training. And it's like, and everyone that hears that knows the difference. There's a difference between just showing up and doing the work, and going hard and putting the effort in and actually, giving it a red hot crack. We see training so many times. Exercise. Yeah, there's a difference. There's like so many people who do working sets that would barely even be a warm up. Mm-hmm. If maybe they had someone telling them you can go heavier. Either it's like self accountability, maybe it's self belief, maybe it's just being willing to like push a little bit more, or maybe it's safety.
I think this issue is really important. So you've hit the nail on the head there. So I actually had a couple of thoughts related to what you're talking about earlier, but we got sidetracked. So I think there's obviously the issue with people being horrible at gauging their RIR. That's the first issue. Then the second one is people are generally fearful of hurting themselves, right? That's why they don't push all the way to failure, or they're fearful of that discomfort, right? So they fear the discomfort that comes with, obviously, metabolic fatigue, all that build up, losing their breath, all the stuff that comes with having, high degree of effort within a set. And then we also have this fear of failure that a lot of people are afraid of as well. They don't want to fail. Like, failing the set, even when I had in Martin's study, even when I had 0 reps left in the tank, I knew that I grinded for like 5 seconds of my last rep and I completed it. And he said, you have to go again because you have to hit failure. That's a horrible feeling. I didn't want to finish the set on my chest and fail. Like, I would have racked it just because I didn't want to feel that feeling. So people, I think, are also afraid of failing a set because it doesn't look good. There's a lot of, I guess, stigma attached to that in the gym. Like, on gym fails, when a guy drops on his chest and his mates have to pick it up off him, like all that kind of stuff. There's a bit of a stigma there, right? And then I think the other issue is there's this fear of technique breakdown because, especially with the girls, right? I notice this a lot with my female clients. They want to do it properly, right? And what happens is when we push certain exercises a little bit harder, our technique starts to break down. And I know with a lot of the women I coach anyway, they don't like that because they feel like they're not doing it properly. And women are we know this through a lot of research, they're more neurotic than men, which is actually a really good trait because it means you do things properly. And that's what women do for the most part, which is another reason why I think people don't like to push it all the way to failure. So I think the key is to identify which of these issues, and usually it's going to be one or more of them, is causing this person not to be able to push themselves in their training and get more out of their sets. And then you have a unique solution for each of those issues. So for example, the person who isn't gauging their RIR accurately, we start taking their sets to failure. Simple as that. The person who has a fear of failing, you really have to have a shift of mindset and change some of their belief structures and systems around training, that, you don't have to fear failing. That's actually a really positive thing because there's a recipe for learning and progress lying at the end of every set you take to failure. and you have to reframe that entire perspective. And then I think for the people who are fearful of hurting themselves, you can either use machines or like low skill movements with like lighter loads and stuff like that. And again, change some perspectives around their body, believing in their body's ability to, work hard and recover, all those kind of things. And then the fear of technique breakdown, again, I think you could use a similar approach to the prior example where you use a machine where technique's less likely to break down. So I think they're the main issues that people face when it comes to pushing a set to failure. And I think if you can attack each of those with their own unique solution, that will give a lot of people, if there's coaches out there listening or individuals who want to take their training a little bit more seriously, I think that's, I guess, my best estimate at this point as to how you would overcome those. What do you guys think on that?
I think just a short point, like, don't be so scared if your last couple of reps look a little ugly. Like, I can guarantee that your last 5-second grind on whatever you're doing, like that, there would have been a little bit of fucking shaking and a little bit of moving around, and things got, the weight got sticky, and you're probably making some fucking weird ass faces. Like, that's okay, because fucking every sport in the world, if you're pushing it to your limit, like there is going to be some of that pushback, and there is going to be a bit of resistance. That's normal, and it's sort of accepted in every other sport. You look at the marathon runners pulling in on their final 400, they look absolutely fucked, and everyone's clapping like, great job, guys, you pushed yourself really hard. But all of a sudden in bodybuilding, a bit of that happens, like, oh, he's pushing too hard. That can't be good. He needs to pull it back a little bit, and that's fucked.
Even
I couldn't agree more. I think I actually wrote, mic drop. I actually wrote a quote on that a couple of weeks ago. Where is it? I gotta find it. Here we go.
Jamie, can you pull that up?
Here we go. This is a quote.
What does Rogan say? Jamie,
can you pull that up?
So yeah, we've got no Jamie, so I have to pull it myself. But this is what I wrote literally a few weeks ago, Jackson, because I was having the same thought. Sometimes it's okay to let your technique slide in pursuit of unlocking a weight or performance you haven't yet achieved. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And over time, you should aim to improve your form with that new level of performance.
Yeah, love that.
Like that's as simple as it has to be. Like every time I've gone to touch a weight that I've never touched before, it doesn't look like, 70% of my 1 rep max. Like it looks like 102% of my 1 rep max, and it looks shonky. But then over time, you got to get better with that. So it looks like 100%. Then it becomes your 95% in 1 rep max. Then it becomes your 90%. Right? Yeah. That is how performance is enhanced over time. You tidy up your technique when you sort of reach these new levels of performance. And I think we do have this, I guess, idea of bodybuilding being, so perfect and controlled. And in many regards, it is a very different sport. It's a controlled environment. We pick the weights. It's a, enclosed environment. There's a lot that we do control, and there aren't many variables that are changing unless we change them ourselves. But when it comes to your set performance, don't be afraid of, your technique sliding a little bit. We've almost got this fear of or this phobia of poor technique. And yeah, for sure, that's for good reason, because, 10 years ago, the bros not touching their chests on a bench press, or, doing curls like this, like that was a huge problem. So we need to go the other way. But like most things in the fitness industry, the pendulum swings back and forth. We went from over here with horrible form across the board to over here now. There's, you're not allowed to grind a rep or have any kind of, technique breakdown when you're pushing a set to RP 10. That's bullshit. The answer's in the middle,
Yeah. Like we're all, well, we're not all, but most of us, when we enter the gym, if we're highly motivated and it's a big priority for us, ideally we become the best we can. So, i.e., uncovering our potential. The only way that we can find how good we can be is if we test the limit. That's a reality. If you're never testing the limit and never taking some sets to when they are a big fucking struggle, then you just forget about being the best you can. I think that's what some people need to realize. Like, when you're up close to those limits, things are going to be a little bit shaky, and that's okay, because that's when you know that you are in the mix for creating a stimulus that is potentially going to lead to you being the best that you possibly can be.
Agreed. Like, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's a message I often try and drum home with my clients. Like, doesn't feel good when, the weights slow down. It doesn't feel nice when you're at the bottom of a squat straining or the bottom of a leg press, but sometimes you just got to fucking work. It's like, and that's what they're there for. Like, ultimately, I think, you know, if you're out there and you're coaching people, you know, sometimes you have to have those hard conversations with people and, you know, get them to critically evaluate their own training and say, well, are you actually training hard enough? Like, you know, when you're making these evaluations, you know, what are you thinking? One I like to use with my clients, I'll be like, if I said there's $1,000 on the table for every rep that you do after this point, how many reps do you think you do? And then they go, oh, like 2. And I'm like, what, you'd stop at $2,000? I'm like, no, you wouldn't. Like, if I genuinely started pulling out wads of cash, they just had to go to a failure, they'd probably like, they'd cash the fuck up. You know what I mean? No one's just being like, oh, 1, 2, I'm done. I can't do anymore. Like, you know,
I like that.
It's a good one. But I also think like what Jacob mentioned earlier, and he spoke about, you know, anchoring failure in their mind, like what that feels like. And obviously different exercises, you know, hitting that kind of that critical point of like where we actually see, you know, contractile failure. You can no longer fully extend on a leg press, or your technique's breaking down significantly, and we want to potentially avoid that. But like getting them to experience it in a controlled environment and actually being like, okay, well, we're just going to keep going. You think you can do 3 reps, we'll just keep going and see how many you can do before we fail, or before we hit a point where we say, okay, that's enough, or you know, we're seeing breakdown that's sufficient to say that that's failure, right? And I think doing it in a controlled environment obviously helps people then reframe what they actually think failure is. And now then it's like, you only need to do it once every few months, right? But everyone needs an audit. Everyone has to like audit their training, just like you would audit a business. You maybe audit your friends. Like, you can't just go through life and do things without like stopping and actually evaluating what you're doing, right? Because like we said, if you've been doing this for 6 years and you have never stopped to be like, am I actually training hard enough? Could I have done more reps there? No, that was a 3. And you're just like, you know, write 3 down and carry on. And you leave and you go, oh, that was pretty good. I feel like I have a pump. But then you could literally perform the exact same session 12 hours later, you know, without those, you know, regular evaluations and those like stop checks, being like, okay, am I training? I'm going to take this to failure and see how many I can do. And that reframing is so valuable, like for the training that follows.
Yep.
And I think something.
I totally agree. Audits are absolutely necessary. And that's why I like to program them for my intermediate lifters for mostly, especially with isolation exercises or machines. At the end of their mesocycle, you have a couple of sets to failure.
Yeah.
You know, you film that shit and you watch it back. And if you don't see the concentric speed or the cadence of the concentric decrease on a continual basis over the last like 5 reps to the point where you're unable to push it up and you're terminating sets early, you've got some shit to work on in your next mesocycle. You're going to have a few more sets to failure. So I think it's really important to audit yourself, and video is a great way to do that. Or having
that's what I was going to say, like getting
partner, that is crucial. But for the most part, people just like to shy away from hard work and will look for excuses as to why they can't, you know, go ham.
Interesting talk.
Sorry, I was just going to say, hopefully the industry, it's like, I think, you know, and this was something that went up in the recent posts that we did on the JPS page, was just about like hard training. And it's like the pendulum of the industry and like kind of that rhetoric and the narrative that we all like push, I think it's shifting back now. Whereas like, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was like, you know, minimal effective volume. It was like training sub-maximally, all like, you know, not doing too much. You know, being smarter with your training was all the rage. And now it's kind of like coming back and it's like, well, maybe we took that a bit too far and we were taking it too easy and we were seeing like, yeah, we're seeing good results, but maybe we could have seen more. And now it's going to go the other way and everyone's going to start training harder. We're going to start pushing more accountability to, you know, making training and like genuinely pushing ourselves, and the industry will kind of push that narrative along. And then we'll probably no doubt see, you know, get taken too far like we always do. And then that will slowly shift back. And hopefully over time, it continues to progress, and whatever it is, we continue to see people improving their training and the outcomes that they see.
That's a nice handball onto the point that I was about to bring up. And I was basically going to put it to the group, is that, do we think that we've touched on a number of things that could be playing into training issues at the moment, but one thing I think we haven't really touched on is this overall decrease in mental resiliency among the fitness industry, specifically to the sort of the younger gen coming through. And I'll handball this over to Jacob. But Jacob was doing some crazy shit back in the day, and so was I. And that was because we had the mindset that it was hard work first. Do as much hard work as we can basically handle. And if we can squeeze a little bit of recovery in, that's fine. But now it's like the generation I feel now is so concerned with not doing too many sets, not pushing those sets too hard, making sure they're not training on too many days, and all these other recovery modalities. And there's also like the training and the work and the effort is almost secondary to that. And I think like I'll let Jacob finish, like not saying what Jacob and I was doing back in the day was optimal, but fucking hell, if mental resiliency is a sword, we were sharpening that fucking blade like nothing else. And once you have those skills, it makes training completely freaking different.
Your capacity for, or your threshold for tolerating stress is just so much higher. You know where the ceiling is, right? You know how much you can do, and anything below that feels easy, right?
Yeah, I think this new gen has low fucking ceilings. Like, explain what you were doing with like your training with your like the footy and the stuff that you're doing back in the day. Just give people a perspective.
Yeah. So first of all, I was eating about 1,800 calories a day, and no, I wasn't misreporting because I literally had 5 meals and I didn't eat carbohydrates. And Samuel will attest to this. I did not cheat my diet for like 2 years. I would run a 3K time trial in the morning, go home, have a shake, go to the gym, do weights, and then I'd go to football training, which was 2 hours of training in the evening on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Every second day, I'd run a 1 kilometer time trial in the morning, then go to the gym, and then I'd go do more running in the evening. And I was doing that 7 days a week, no days off, for literally like 12 to 18 months. And I remember I was that exhausted that I used to get to a 3 kilometer time trial at the footy club. And I'd have Eminem blaring in my ears, before we'd go out and start the trial. And I would actually like cry. I was in tears because I was just that fucking exhausted. But I learned to push myself. That's obviously not the right way to go about things, but I learned what I was capable of. I was like, if I was to tell people to do that now, there's no way that they would even be willing to do it. And this was all self-imposed. I had my football training where they'd tell me what to do and stuff, but the running and the gym sessions, I did those out of my own accord because I wanted to be the best. And I think that really, at least helped my ceiling increase. So when I did things like powerlifting, holy fucking shit, dude, that felt like a walk in the park. After bodybuilding, where I had to starve myself for years on end and, put myself through 2-a-day workouts and train with all this volume. When I did powerlifting, it's like 3 lifts and do a couple of reps. That felt like a piece of cake. And body felt like a piece of cake. Bodybuilding felt like a piece of cake after that stint in football. So having a higher ceiling made everything that I did after that just feel like a walk in the park. And I think there's a lot of utility, like you said, Jackson, to sharpening your sword, or at least trying to push that ceiling for your tolerance to just hard work up and up and up as you especially early on in your career, because then you can do what you need to do to get the results, and you can push through things that you need to do in order to get the progress and the outcomes that you desire.
Yeah, that's so well said. Because I've got new clients at the moment. Give the training compliance report for the week, and the report says I missed 2 sessions, but just burnt out, and all I've got programmed is 5 45-minute sessions a week, and it's like that ceiling is so fucking low.
You're burnt out.
Yeah, it's like what people think that they're truly capable of is, I think, so far less than what people truly are, but people just aren't prepared to do what Jacob was doing back in the day. And I think it's an overall industry problem with the messages that sometimes we're sending out that's confusing people that are coming up that don't fully understand the context of them and haven't walked the walk in the trenches of truly fucking shit and hard work yet. So they have no baseline to compare to.
And I think a lot of people they take these messages that have been put out there that are actually good messages. Like, yeah, we do want to train, intelligently, and we want to obviously be conscious of, making sure that how much training we're doing is effective, and we want to minimize any risks of injury and maximize safety and all of these things. But I think they've been taken too far, and they've been pushed along, and it's like kind of people taking the piss without even realizing it. And it's high time for the quote unquote leaders in the industry to recognize this. And I think, we're already seeing that change. It's like become a much more hot topic. You know, we spoke about this like not long ago. It's like people, you have clients and they'll be like, oh, it's like, I've done 4 weeks of training. Am I changing my training program? And it's like, yeah, no. Like, why would you change it? Like, you're a part-time gym enthusiast who has squatted 4 times in the last month. Do you think you're so good at squatting that you could just change it now? It's like, you probably only have 1 or 2 weeks of even like semi-productive training. Like, you can just keep this program going until you are physically incapable of performing again. And it's like, for so many people, they wouldn't even get to that point because they just don't train enough. The frequency is not there. Yeah, I could talk about this one for days.
Something that I've done with my clients recently, and this has been a change in my coaching approach purely for this problem, is I never pretend to be a training expert. I always focus heavily on nutrition, and the clients, most of them do just come from nutritional programming only. But now what I'm starting to find is that even with a great nutritional approach, I'm not getting the desired outcome if they're not handling business in the gym. And a lot of people aren't handling business in the gym. So now what I'm saying is, listen, show me your work, send me your working sets on WhatsApp here so I can actually fucking see what's going on. I never did this before. And I've only just started doing it now.
But it's necessary.
It is now, but it's only, I had trust in the people of handling business in the gym and pushing themselves, but they're just not anymore. So sometimes I have to get a set of hack squats and be like, listen, Catherine, you had fucking 7 more on there.
Yeah, you're not going deep enough.
You need to add a fucking whatever it side onto that. And then they come back next week like, fuck, I could. Like, who knew? It's like, well, you wouldn't know unless you had someone telling you. But
yeah, but it's the same as like with nutrition coaching, right? It's like how many times do people misreport, underreport, like they make mistakes. And it's like, no one as an individual wants to believe that they make mistakes, right? It's like no one wants to acknowledge the fact that we're not perfect, but we are. We all make mistakes. Even the 3 of us, no doubt, when we train, like leave some in the tank sometimes. You know, maybe don't push too hard. Yeah, but it happens. But it's like, it's more a matter of how long do you let it happen for before you actually stop and, you know, do something about it. It's like, was it 1 session? Was it 1 exercise? Or has it been 5 years of your training career?
Yeah,
that's the difference.
It's an interesting mental framing. Like I've had sets in the past where like I'll finish it and then it's just playing on my mind for like a good.
Like I stopped early.
You probably could have got 1 there, and
you need a therapist, Jackson.
Yeah, for a number of reasons, Jacob. Don't get me started. But I think a lot of other people when they're training is they rationalize it that they are in a close proximity to failure or close to their maximal effort, just so they don't have to deal with the reality that potentially they are training like a little bitch, so to speak. So I think humans are so good at creating excuses in one word.
Justification is our forte, brother. That's what we do.
It's to divert the acceptance of what's truly the explanation for why something is occurring. And the reality is that potentially we just don't want to have to endure the discomfort, but it's easier on our psyche to say that was a 1 RIR and be done.
That was a hard set.
Yeah.
Jackson. So what you're talking about there is like what's called a post hoc justification, which is where like after the fact we justify and rationalize to ourselves why something happened, right? Which is not necessarily accurate at all. It's just like the easiest way to deal with it mentally. But what you're referring to there is cognitive dissonance, which is the difficulty of holding 2 conflicting beliefs. So you believe you train hard. Yeah, man. Like I go to the gym, like I'm a pretty serious lifter. Like, you know, I've done a physique comp. Like you think of yourself as a serious lifter, but then when you do a set, you know that you could do more. And you like, you know, you again have that conflicting belief, like, oh, I'm a pussy, but I'm also a serious lifter on social media. So what do I do? And you just like, you're in la la land with no fucking idea of like what's actually reality anymore, because you're just trying to uphold these 2 conflicting ideas. That's cognitive dissonance. And that's like, I think you're on the money there. Huge part of what's going on with the whole issue around people not training hard enough.
Facts.
You're such a lad when you say shit like that. All right, guys, we'll leave it there. Hopefully that was enjoyable. Hopefully you guys learned something and at least, got some value out of this one. If you need to go check yourself in the gym, please do so. If you have questions, feel free to ask us. And until next time, peace out.
Share the fuck out of it.
Yeah, make sure you just train hard, motherfuckers. All right.